Welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. Thank you for viewing our show. We are a new show, as you know, so we are so grateful for all of your subscribes on YouTube. And of course, if you are not a patron on Patreon, please become one because you will get access to behind-the-scenes stuff, special interviews, early access to our show, which comes out a few days earlier for patrons, and swag and access to live events before everybody else does. You can go to patreon.com/thenomikishow. Follow us on Twitter at thenomikishow. And speaking of live events, we have a live event coming up for Super Tuesday. That's March 3rd in Los Angeles with an insane lineup. We have Michael Brooks flying from New York to LA to do the live show with us. Alana Minkowski coming from New York to LA. Francesca Fiorentini, Nando Villa, LA Charger, Justin Jackson, and Lucy Flores and David Diane is going to be giving us our election results on stage. It's a live event in a warehouse in Los Angeles, downtown LA. It's going to be so much fun. You can go to our bit.ly. The link is going to be below in the description if you want to get tickets. All right, we have a great show today. One of my mentors, someone I look to for wisdom in understanding how the Democratic Party works, what movements need to go to, anytime I need inspiration or perspective, Larry Cohen. He is the former president of CWA. He's the chair of the board of Our Revolution. He's a former senior advisor to Bernie Sanders in 2016, his campaign. And he's also a DNC member. So he's going to be giving us intel on what's about to happen at the convention and so much more. We have Kate Willett, who is a proud Bernie bro, and we're going to be discussing her piece in Elle.com, which has been going viral. Thanks for joining the show. All right, it's time that we have to have a serious talk. It's a talk about Elizabeth Warren. I have been holding off on this conversation because I respect Elizabeth Warren. A lot of my friends in the movement are supporting Elizabeth Warren. I think that people should be able to run in primaries on their own ideas and on their own platform with their own candidacy because I believe in democracy and I believe in our primary system. It's the same argument I made when I ran in a primary. It's the same argument I made when Bernie Sanders ran in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. More democracy is better for us as a whole. But also, sometimes more democracy can be a tool for bad actors to come in. And those bad actors are usually well-funded, who can circumnavigate the democratic process and essentially divide and conquer so that they win. And I'm talking about Michael Bloomberg. So right now, Michael Bloomberg is set to join the Nevada debate stage, and he's polling very well in second place in many states right now based on the state polling. And of course, he's been able to do so by purchasing his way through ads, through organization on the ground, and of course, online. He got his way onto the debate stage by buying his polling to get on the debate stage. Essentially, a leg up against folks who were building very organic campaigns like Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. People I don't agree with necessarily. Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang, of course, is now out of the process, not to mention many other candidates who couldn't make it onto the debate stage. Sitting senators. Many are sitting senators and governors. So Michael Bloomberg is on this debate stage. He's buying his way through his candidacy, and he is depending right now on many candidates showing a strong enough showing to get a few delegates in some states, or worse, they're doing well enough that they're pulling away from Bernie Sanders, but not gathering delegates. And that's where I'm talking about Elizabeth Warren. I love that there was a progressive woman in this race. I love her work. I think that she's been a great advocate for breaking up big banks, for breaking up conglomerates, for breaking up Amazon. I think that this is the kind of energy we need to have in this race when we're facing somebody who's an oligarch. We need more candidates to be talking about the dangers of oligarchs, the dangers of monopolies, the dangers of big business. But right now, we're at a sensitive moment where it just does not seem authentic when, as of 3 hours ago, I'm looking at her Twitter page, she is laying out attacks against Michael Bloomberg's racist policies. Yet her being in the race is actually creating a huge opening for Michael Bloomberg. You know, as of right now, we have not had the Nevada caucus yet. She's still doing decently well in Nevada. She may pull a few delegates from Nevada, but she did not do well in New Hampshire at all. She gained no delegates. And of course, in Iowa, she did not do well either. And this should be concerning because if she's losing momentum, and those who are staying with her, they are most likely, and it's very hard to break this down, but most likely pulling from Bernie Sanders. Listen, right now, Bernie Sanders is the candidate in the race that has raised the money to go through to the finish line. He has the on-the-ground organization to go through to the finish line, and he's only gaining support even from solid Democrats who have been on the other side of Bernie for the last 4 years. We are talking about Hillary supporting, Hillary delegates, Hillary staffers, solid Democratic strategists saying it is more important that we keep this party together than give this party to Mayor Bloomberg, who is basically going to kill the party and effectively the two-party system. Now, the two-party system is broken. I have no doubt about it. I mean, I am a big believer in many powers, more, parties, more ideas, more democracy, but not if the alternative to the two-party system is an oligarchy. And that's where we are right now. Michael Bloomberg is buying his way into this primary process. Michael Bloomberg is buying his messaging online when Twitter and Facebook have they've put forward these standards, these political standards to stop fake news. So your political ads, they have to go through this whole screening process. They have to be authentic. They have to be verified. There's major oversight right now when it comes to advertising on Facebook and on Twitter to prevent quote unquote fake news. So what did Michael Bloomberg do? He said, I'll circumnavigate that. I'm just going to buy people on Twitter and on Facebook to push back against Bernie Sanders' movement. And also to get the movement so distracted by Michael Bloomberg and his Twitter trolls that they're now fighting with those trolls online. You see what's happening here? I don't know if it's necessarily going to work because it seems like folks are very focused on Michael Bloomberg's legacy in New York, his behavioral patterns, whether it's the 64 sexual harassment allegations against him or his racist ideas and language, recent racist language. That's all coming out on Twitter, and it's very hard to fight against that when much of it is on the record through tapes or through recordings. But what I'm concerned about here is when it's becoming abundantly clear that the race moving forward, going into Super Tuesday, very expensive states with, there are several states on Super Tuesday that are expensive. So you have to have an operation that can exist in both Texas and California and other states. You have to have a diverse enough support in those states to do well and to get delegates. And of course, Bernie Sanders has that. Now, Elizabeth Warren is maintaining a group of progressive supporters. The problem is that Elizabeth Warren is not, either she doesn't believe the writing on the wall and someone's giving her some sort of fantasy, this illusion of her path forward, or she thinks she has something to negotiate with someone else. Because if she's still in this race pulling from Bernie Sanders, it's likely she's not negotiating with Bernie Sanders. Or she's just delusional and an egomaniac. I like Elizabeth Warren. I have been very careful about criticizing her, but we have to be real right now. If we don't want Michael Bloomberg as our president, we need to have the progressives aligned, unified, true unity in solidarity. Elizabeth Warren right now keeps bringing up this term unity. Unity was an idea, it was pushed out in 2016 that we needed to unify as a party against Donald Trump. Well, right now we have two nemesis. We have Donald Trump and we have Michael Bloomberg, who is questionably just as, I think he's just as concerning. He has very similar tendencies as Donald Trump. He might not speak the same language, literally, as Donald Trump, but his actions are very revealing and his behaviors are very similar to Donald Trump's. As at this point in the election that Donald Trump was in 2016, I think there's probably more footage of Michael Bloomberg behaving inappropriately, and there's a record, there's an actual legacy, there's a legislative legacy that follows Michael Bloomberg around that Donald Trump did not have. So given the fact that we are going up against this man who's going to buy his way into the general election of the Democratic Party, because it's going to be a two-person election in the end if we do go to the convention, then we do need unity. But it's not going to be around somebody who doesn't have a mass movement. It's not going to be around somebody who is not supported by a wide-ranged coalition, who doesn't have enough money to go through Super Tuesday and beyond. So we want to talk about unity. That means solidarity. And as much as I respect Elizabeth Warren, if she really wants to protect her legacy as a progressive senator, her reputation as a progressive senator in the Senate, if she wants to be a leader and be in the history books as somebody who is bringing about real change, if she doesn't want to betray the people who got her to this point, the progressive movement that amplified her message, that supported her, that showed up on picket lines with her, that showed up at rallies with her, that despite everything in 2016 continued to support her and urge her to run. If she doesn't want to lose that support, then she's probably going to have a moment with herself right now and say, I am putting my full support behind Bernie Sanders. And what's very likely, I believe, is if she does do that, if she cuts the crap, cuts the attacks against Bernie Sanders, she could very well likely be the vice presidential nominee. So if she's not doing that, then what's her motivation here? To be on a ticket with Michael Bloomberg? How's that going to work out? You think you believe him? You think that he needs you? What's the end game here? Is the end game that you're going to continue to receive the support of the progressive movement by going after them and calling them Bernie bros? By attacking Bernie Sanders? By laying out false sexist claims against the movement and the workers? All those people that they claim are Bernie bros, those are $27 donations from immigrants, from teachers, from union organizers, from hotel workers, from home aides, from students, from people in medical debt. When you look at his supporters, when you look at the collection of donors that have given, sacrificed for the sake of this movement in Bernie Sanders' campaign, you are attacking every single one of those people. And I think that is a very, very, very slippery slope to go down, Elizabeth Warren. So I have been cautious about criticizing her. I have been cautious about challenging her. But I was so insulted by the continuous attacks against the movement of workers, the movement of $27 donations, $18 donations, $10 donations for people who just want better lives. People who know that the path to defeat not just Donald Trump, but Michael Bloomberg is through the Bernie Sanders movement. So when you say things like Bernie bros, that is minimizing the intellect that you are putting out there. The fact that we have seen you as a smart candidate, as a progressive leader who has the courage to take on monopolies and big banks. Well, if you have the courage to take on these monopolies and the oligarchs, then you would support Bernie Sanders and the movement, lock arms, support him in defeating Michael Bloomberg. Because right now, you are only helping Michael Bloomberg by staying in this race and attacking Bernie Sanders. So for those of you who are watching right now, who have friends that support Elizabeth Warren, as I do, I would sit down with them and I'd say, this is the pathway forward for her. She has 0 delegates as of today, February 18th. She may collect a few more delegates, but she's very likely not going to get to the point where she's going to have delegates to negotiate on the floor of the convention. She doesn't have the movement, the coalition. She doesn't have the organizational support on the ground. She's losing people on her campaign, so much so that senior advisors are leaking things to the press. While the idea of Elizabeth Warren as a president was at one time inspirational, the second she started to pull away from her progressive platform, whether it be Medicare for All or attacking other progressives in the race, people started to lose support with her. The whole point is she was authentic at one point, but if you express that you are not authentic with a movement that looks for authentic candidates, you're going to be stuck. She started to pull from the centrists and lose the progressives. And we really were unable to know who she was. And moving forward, people don't know who she is. Is she somebody for Medicare for All? Is she somebody who believes in workers' rights and economic justice? Well, if she is, then why wouldn't she be choosing to support the movement and negotiate something on that ticket? Because how amazing would that ticket be? I understand that we want a woman president. Trust me, as a woman, I get frustrated by even male progressives, and I have too many stories to tell you, but that is not a progressive problem, that is a universal problem. And I believe that the path towards empowering more women is through intersectional economic justice. And right now, Elizabeth Warren is not running on that platform. So if you are a woman supporting Elizabeth Warren and you're a progressive and you want to see progressives in office, please understand the math here. Understand that Elizabeth Warren does not have a path to victory, and she's only pulling from the platform that helps women. Nobody else in this race. Michael Bloomberg is not going to sit there and advocate for women and for workers and for immigrants. He is not going to protect people. He is going to concentrate all the power towards the top. And so, if you want to live in a better world, I hope you can look at that math and you can see that the polls in every state moving forward, she is polling third, fourth, and fifth. That the fundraising, that her own organizational power on the ground is only losing support. And her being in the race is pulling anywhere between 10 to 15% from Bernie Sanders. And that hands the nomination to Michael Bloomberg. Larry Cohen has become a mentor of mine over the years. I served with him on the Unity Reform Commission. He was the vice chair of the Unity Reform Commission, which we've talked about on the show, because it was the commission that decided to reform the party and the primary process that we are now living in today. He is the former president of the Communications Workers of America. He was a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. He's the chair of Our Revolution. He's also a DNC member, and he's the lone Bernie supporter on the DNC's Rules Committee at the convention as of right now. Larry, thank you for joining the show. Hopefully a regular guest. A lot of rules were changed and updated and reformed in 2000 on the Unity Reform Commission that came out of the 2016 convention, and we're now sitting in what seems to be a very messy process. We saw what happened in Iowa. The caucuses are under fire right now. We don't know what's going to happen at the convention. How are you feeling about everything?
Sure. So we have a better process than 2016. Even in Iowa, with all the mess, at least there was a head count in all the caucuses, as opposed to just an awarding of delegates and no way to determine if it was accurate or not. Going forward, we have the actual elected delegates will control the nomination. I still believe it'll be a first ballot nomination. That's a huge improvement over 4 years ago, when the networks would flash up that Hillary Clinton had 500 and something non-elected so-called super delegates versus Sanders, with about 10. So, I actually think the process is better. It's a long road to democracy within the party. And actually, for me, within the 57 parties that make up the Democratic Party, they're legally separate entities. And, I say forward ever. We need to bring on democracy within and not just talk about voter suppression outside.
It's interesting you say that there are 57 separate legal entities, because I think the media would have you believe, and there's a lot of misunderstanding of how the DNC functions, that the DNC can just tell every state what to do. But that's not true, right?
Right. Yeah, the only thing the DNC can do, which is, as you know, quite a laborious process, is to incentivize or penalize delegates every 4 years when the president is nominated. That's the only real leverage they have. Mm-hmm. They are awarding, some grants to state parties, so that's on the incentive side, for if certain tests are met. But basically, the 57 parties, 50 states, Washington, D.C., 5 territories, and Democrats abroad are totally autonomous. Some of them are quite democratic, mostly west of the Mississippi as well as northern New England. And some of them are notoriously undemocratic, led by New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and many of the others along the East Coast and South.
Yeah, and Illinois, not to forget.
And Illinois is getting better, actually, but we don't want to go too far into the weeds here.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. But it is interesting because, I think out of the Iowa caucus and going, into the Nevada caucuses as of this taping, the conversation is really about how broken the caucus system is. And I think you and I would both agree that there are a lot of ways that the caucus system could be improved. But it's not like primaries, all primaries are the same and they're that much better. And, we've talked about this before on the show, that there was a smear effort by some people who may not have the intentions of better democracy, saying that the Bernie side was trying to replace primaries with caucuses, which of course we didn't have the power to do so and was never on the table and never discussed. But with that being said,
never discussed would be the important phrase there.
Never discussed. With that being said, and also just to mention that we were in the minority, so we were suddenly so powerful in the minority of the commission, twisting
Right.
everybody's arms. But let's talk about the differences between primaries and caucuses, because I don't think a lot of people understand, how each of them function and what their pluses and minuses are.
Sure. So, on the downside of the primaries, for the most part, they're state-run primaries, so they're subject to state law. There are some positives in that in terms of a state election apparatus being there, but in many states, that apparatus is there to suppress voters.
Right.
And there's all kinds of restrictions about registration. New York is the worst, remains the worst on party registration. The deadline was yesterday to register for as a Democrat for the April 28th primary. And I don't know the updated count, but there were 3 million unaffiliated voters, mostly young, who, don't get any notice that if you didn't register as a Democrat by yesterday, you're not going to be able to vote in the primary once again.
Right.
Now, that's an improvement from 2016 when it was 6 months, but the Unity Reform Commission and the DNC said there must be same-day party switching. This is an example of the autonomy. New York said initially, too bad, and then under some pressure, several months ago, the governor agreed to support this 60-day, or a little more than 60-day rule. But there's lots of trade-offs here. There are examples of states, though, that have primaries where people can show up. Even New Hampshire, I put mostly in that category. There's other problems there, but they can show up, say, I'm joining the party, and I'm voting in the primary. That would be the gold standard, but probably about half the states are there and half are not. And then again, you have the issue of voter registration requirements and doing everything they can, states like Wisconsin, to purge the rolls.
Right. And in terms of caucuses, the arguments people make is they're not accessible, they're not democratic, they don't reflect a diversity of voter base. We've heard all the different arguments. What are the pros and cons of caucuses?
Well, so the pros, so first of all, there's only 4 left.
Right.
These 2 that are getting a lot of attention, Iowa and Nevada, and then Wyoming and the Virgin Islands, which is the last event in the nominating process on June 10th, but they have, on June 6th, but they have 10 delegates and not a lot of attention there. The pros would be that, the Iowa caucus, the neighbors gather, they're all there together. They are spending more time. I'm not sure if that's a positive or not, but it's a lot more time. And it shows a deeper commitment. So you're getting closer to the more committed party members deciding how their 41 delegates would get elected. The obvious negative is people who are not physically able to vote or are working in the past couldn't participate at all. This year they had what I would call a not so great satellite caucus process where people could have a caucus in advance, say in a nursing home or at a workplace. And there were about 100 of those. And even in other countries, people had small caucuses. But again, we encouraged vote by mail for those people. They would have a simple affidavit about they couldn't caucus, and they would have been able to, rank their choices, at least a couple of them, and that would have had a lot more accessibility. The access question that you mentioned is the big problem with caucuses.
And that's where the DNC, of course, without going down the rabbit hole of the app, but they essentially chose to implement this app to reveal the numbers that were not being transparently released to the campaigns or to the world, and also to set up the satellite caucuses within a certain structure. Like they basically strong-armed the Iowa State Party to do what they were pushing for.
Yes. It was the Rules Committee particularly, but the Rules Committee is heavily, is heavily dependent on the staff. Nobody can sit on a Rules Committee, even these political consultants that are on there, and know the details of 57 states and how they operate. So, what I would say again, it's way down in the weeds, but that number one, why did they need an app? While 1,780 or so caucuses sounds like a lot, we're talking about 1,780 pieces of paper that you take a photo of and email in, and then a team of people count the votes. So, on the one hand, I think there is a problem in not saying to people, listen, we have a caucus. We pride ourselves on that level of participation, but we're not going to have a count, especially for people on the East Coast. We're not going to have a count before you go to sleep. That's definitely going to be the case in Nevada. Anybody in New York who waits up for that count is going to be waiting for something that won't happen. But that's the nature of the caucus. It's a slow count. The last time where the precinct chairs just called in the delegate votes meant that you couldn't get a recount. And there were many caucuses where they flipped the numbers around and all kinds of things, and you couldn't do anything about it. Well, that's not what democracy looks like either. So you're going to have a caucus, and who knows what will happen in 4 years now after this. But, it's not like transparency is a nuisance. There's got to be a paper backup for how the delegates get allotted or forget the caucus.
And then in states where, it's interesting because you mentioned New York State, and for those of you who aren't from New York is a Democratic state. It's the legislature is completely Democratic at this point. The governor controls the party. He decides who's a member of the party, representative to the DNC, I should say, from the party, unlike other states that might also be Democratic. But if you are in a state that's, say, Republican, right? And you have a primary, the real concern there, as you mentioned with Wisconsin, is a different type of voter suppression. It may not be the voter suppression that the Democrats in New York have, because they're all incumbents and don't want new people joining the party to vote in new people. But in a state like Wisconsin, it's very real voter suppression.
Yes, traditional voter suppression, which probably 20 or more states have some version of, including South Carolina, where it's difficult to vote.
Yeah.
And in Wisconsin's case, as you know, they purged tens of thousands of voters because they moved, or they didn't, some version of moving to a different address, which, again, no other democracy in the world operates like this. They don't have the registration anywhere else. You show up with a valid ID and you vote, and it's a paper ballot almost everywhere in the world. And again, it may take somewhat longer to count, but you have a backup as opposed to a machine, and people know or believe at least that there's a high level of transparency and validity.
So Larry, going into the convention, I think a lot of people are they feel very left out in the dark about what could possibly happen. The process hasn't been very transparent, whether intentionally so or not. They're confused about the I'm confused about the superdelegate situation at this point, and I was in the room when we were voting on it. But what happens on the first ballot? What happens on the second ballot? What are these committees? I know you're on the Rules Committee for the convention. But you mentioned the Rules Committee and how it's made up of appointees of Tom Perez. Can you explain some of this stuff? Like, pull back the curtain a little bit for folks who are curious.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the easier one. The good news on the Rules Committee is there'll be 164 elected delegates named by their campaigns to the committee, proportional to the delegate strength of that candidate, after June 2nd. So the fact that the existing committees obviously determined by the party chair and the executive committee of the party, I'm actually less concerned about that. I think that to go to your bigger question, if we don't have a first ballot nomination, and I'll talk in a minute about my sense of how we still can have that. On a second ballot, the non-elected delegates, the number fluctuates, but it's about 765. It's made up of all the DNC members plus all the Democrats in the House and the Senate. They have to be there themselves, plus the Democratic governors, plus about 15, former party officials like, President Obama. Only a couple are presidents. But anyway, that totals to about 765. And on a second, now they're delegates. So they vote on rules, they vote on credentials, they vote on the platform. They don't vote on the nomination of the president unless there is not a majority for a candidate on the first ballot. And when I say majority for a candidate, that's a candidate that is nominated during the nomination process right before the delegate vote. So all the elected delegates, some just under 4,000 elected delegates, all vote on the first ballot. But if their candidate is not nominated, meaning they dropped out and they're not nominated, those first ballot delegates, elected delegates, they can vote for anyone they want. Normally, they follow the lead of the candidate that got them elected. It's not like, they got elected because of their name or something.
Right.
So my belief is that there's still better than a 50% chance that that's what will happen. It's like a parliamentary democracy. Negotiations, you can call them deals, power trading will occur so that somebody gets to 1991. That's the magic number. If they don't, though, and obviously more than 2 delegates are nominated and nobody gets 1991, you then get this free-for-all where everybody becomes unpledged. And we jump the number who are voting by 760 on subsequent ballots.
So there would be a chance, I'm not saying this would happen, but if, say, Bernie came in with 1,985, right? And then we go to the second ballot. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If some of Bernie's delegates decided they didn't want to support him, they could go to the other candidate. I'm just trying to use that for experiment. Okay.
Yeah, any delegate, it's in the charter of the party. You would have to actually change the charter, which is a more laborious process than what we worked on together, changing the rules and the call of the convention. Anyway, yes, it's in the charter that delegates can vote any way they want, except that elected delegates for the nomination of the president are bound to vote for the candidate, if nominated, to that candidate that got them elected.
Right.
So yes, on subsequent ballots, not only do you have the unpledged, automatic, non-elected, sometimes called super delegates pouring in, 765 or so of them, but you also have that the other 4,000 are now unpledged.
On the second ballot. So moving into the election, there's got to be a point where we know, right, that it's going to be potentially, whether Bernie wins the plurality or the number 1991 needed or not, we should have a sense, not unlike 2016. I mean, just to remind everybody, Hillary didn't have that number going into the election. They were counting the superdelegates that created this illusion of having hit that number until California.
Correct.
But this time around, say it's very close. Is there going to be a point where we just know we're going into a brokered convention, and and Bernie and whoever that candidate?
So initially, I wouldn't call it so much a brokered convention.
Okay.
I think the pressure should be on the nominees, the potential nominees, to negotiate with each other.
Yeah.
So that we don't have a second ballot with these 768 voting. So again, we made big strides, but as you know, we couldn't get them eliminated altogether. And this is what we ended up with. But the notion that candidates campaign for a year and a half, several $1 billion is spent without counting Bloomberg. There are 53 primaries and 4 caucuses, and somewhere around 30, 40 million votes. And then we're going to go to a convention and have a free-for-all that includes 765 or so unelected delegates, in your scenario, determining the outcome. So to me, the pressure's got to be on from all sides to these candidates that get significant numbers of delegates, and there are thresholds further complicate this. If you don't get 15% in the district that the party has established as the district in that state, it's either a legislative or congressional district, you get no delegates. But in any case, the candidates that get delegates, pressure should be on them to negotiate some kind of power sharing agreement to get to 1991, in my opinion, much better than a free-for-all on a second, third, or more round of balloting in order to get somebody to the new number, which would be around 2,400.
Right, with the superdelegates added.
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in.
Aren't you glad you asked me all these detailed questions?
I am. You know what? Everyone's asking me, and I'm like, I know some of it. I don't know all of it. So I'm glad that we have the encyclopedia here. You are on that rules committee. You're a lone voice. When you look at the rules committee, it would be irresponsible for me not to point out how many folks on that committee that were appointed, not elected, are people in the industry of elections, in the industry of lobbying, in the industry of foreign military, whatever that complex is. These are people who are consultants and lobbyists, and they have a more power than elected DNC members. In the case of California right now, people are running across the state for DNC membership, and the elected members don't get put on these committees. So what do you think the experience is going to be like going onto the Rules Committee at the convention with these folks that you've run up against many times? I shouldn't say this is the first time you've gone through it.
Yeah, well, as I said, I'm counting on the 164 elected delegates that will join each of these committees,
right.
Rules, Platform, and Credentials, and to build alliances and, to speak clearly that these rules are going to be democratic there's no war. They're going to be democratic. They're going to be better than they've been in the past. Mm-hmm. And, the voice of the people who have participated in this somewhat tortuous year and a half of campaigning is going to be the voice that's heard. So I am optimistic that we can get that done. Mm-hmm. And even if I'm the only one out of those 25 or so, I'm going to have a lot of company based on the way these primaries and caucuses are going, and we will be a majority.
Just like last time. So just final words, because I think this is really important. I mean, you've done so much organizing. Most of your experience really has been on the movement side and organizing workers and pushing for progressive change, especially when it comes to economic issues. So for the movement, in the next 6-7 months as we approach the convention and beyond, what are some pieces of advice you could give us that we can learn from 2016 in particular, going into this very heated election?
Well, I think it's, first of all, to stay focused on the issues that motivated us to get involved in the first place, whether that's, a decent healthcare system, for me, Medicare for all, that would put us where every other democracy is, not only the moral reasons, but the economic ones, the gigantic waste of hundreds of billions of dollars a year for profit insurance companies and pharmaceuticals, while we leave out millions of people, right. The worst of both worlds. Or whether it's, racial and gender justice, that we stay focused on, dozens of issues, right? But that we stay focused on the issues that would make us each happier. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be the same for all of us. And that's the only purpose of political involvement. I'm very devoted to Bernie Sanders, for example, but that devotion is about the change that I spent, my life fighting for, workers' rights at the front of that parade for me. And, we're at the bottom of every democracy on workers' rights. Right. So, I think we have to stay focused on issues. We have to realize that change like it or not, in this most complicated 18th century democracy, means the states, the House, the Senate, the courts, it's all lined up against us. One day we're going to have to deal with that when we have built a movement of what I say 50 million people ready to fight for change. But in the meantime, those are the rules we have. And we've got to stay focused no matter who's elected to say, wait a minute, we're here for the change. We're going to fight for the change. We'll go in the streets for the change. And we're not going to give up on that change. That's what our lives, our children, our happiness are all about, is that change. It's not a foot race. It's not a track event about who finishes first. It's about how do we get the change that we believe in and the change that should be within reach.
Larry, beautiful words. Always so great at motivating us in the end. Thank you for joining the Nomiki Show, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the convention, following your leadership at the convention, because you always know what's going to happen.
I don't know about that. We'll follow each other.
You're pretty good at it. I'm very, very grateful to you for all of your work and commitment and leadership, and thanks for joining the show.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks. We are a new show, so every single subscription makes a huge difference. Please subscribe on our YouTube channel, and you can become a member on our Patreon channel at patreon.com/The Show. You'll get access to early and special content, swag, early access to live events. And speaking of live events, we have a live event in Los Angeles on Super Tuesday with an all-star lineup. We'll be doing coverage all night in a great space, and there'll be food and drinks, and it's just going to be a lot of fun. So go to the link that we have in our description to get tickets. Believe it or not, people have become more friendly to Bernie over the last couple of years. In fact, people who were on the other side of the primary in 2016 have found themselves moving on the Bernie bandwagon and supporting Medicare for All, supporting his platform, and becoming full-on Bernie bros. Our next guest is Kate Willett. She is a self-proclaimed Bernie bro, new-ish to the movement, but did support Hillary Clinton in 2016. And you may have seen her piece in Elle magazine, Elle.com, titled, "I Hated Bernie Bros Until I Loved and Lost One." And in it, she talks about her experience with her boyfriend, who was a Bernie bro, who was unable to receive the medical care he needed and unfortunately had a tragic and untimely death. Kate, thank you so much for joining us. I should note that you're also a comedian and you're the host of Reply Guys, so that's where people can find you, and you're very active on Twitter. So thank you for joining us and for sharing your story.
Oh, yeah, sure. I would say also, though, just like one correction.
Sure.
I would not say that I supported Hillary Clinton in 2016. I would say, like, I did vote for Bernie in the end,
right,
but I was really freaked out by the movement. And it was like a tough decision. I felt kind of, I don't know. It was more about being freaked out by a lot of the Bernie online stuff and what I perceived at the time as like some sexism on the internet versus like me being particularly invested in Hillary Clinton. I was more of just a Bernie bro hater.
No, and I think there was so much of that that has been revealed. I think the process of the Bernie bro narrative has been revealed so much over the last few months, probably provoked by Elizabeth Warren, suggesting that Bernie bros were back. And of course, more recently on this date of taping, just yesterday, Michael Bloomberg released an attack ad against Bernie about the Bernie bros. So, in 2016, I don't know if everybody really was able to process where this messaging was coming from and what was real and what was something that, you were given a perspective, and then through that lens, you saw everything. Meaning, like, if someone challenged you on Twitter, it was like a sexist lens. Is that how you sort of took it back then?
I think that the people who said crappy stuff to me, that was real. And people definitely did say sexist stuff to me online. But here's the thing. I support Bernie Sanders, and they still do. I think that what was going on is that the internet can be an aggressive and sexist place. And I assumed that was somehow specific to Bernie Sanders supporters, I think, because of that narrative. But now, having been on both sides of it, I'm like, oh, there's just a lot of people who support every single candidate that say crappy stuff on the internet. You know, it has nothing to do with one candidate or another.
Now, you wrote this piece, and it was very powerful, you know, sharing your story and centered around really Medicare for All, because that's obviously a linchpin of Bernie's campaign. But want to tell us a little bit about your boyfriend and what happened?
Yeah, so you know, I was dating Raghav, and Raghav struggled with depression, and he was not able to get the medicine he needed or the therapy he needed, and he actually ended up dying of depression. And you know, it's, I think, impossible to say that it, you know, it was like 100%. You could absolutely say with, like, you know, let me rephrase. Like, I think it's impossible to say with like 100% certainty that it is attributable to one cause or another. However, I know that at the times in his life when he was able to get care for his depression, he was doing a lot better. And I know that in our relationship, it was really hard to see him understand that he needed to go to the doctor and not be able to. And he had a full-time job, and his job didn't give him insurance because they weren't legally obligated to, since they were a smaller company. And yeah, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever been through in my life. And I feel like it was a completely preventable tragedy. And after that, I became not only open to Medicare for All, but like a full-on zealot for it, because I just don't want to see this happen to anyone else.
He was self-medicating, as you wrote in this piece, because he wasn't able to access, you know, proper medications that he was prescribed earlier. And
yes.
I mean, I just did a little bit of reading on this in preparation for this interview, and I'm really kind of blown away with how many people choose to self-medicate because they don't have the option, and you know, whether it's through friends who have the same medication who give it to them and don't take it as often, or going down the true illegal route, which is, you know, purchasing it on the black market or in other countries. It's the deaths related to it are much higher than I think people would be aware of.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's like, you know, yeah, I think if you don't have, I mean, it's such a big decision to go to the doctor. Even for people who do have insurance, there can be super high deductibles and super high copays. And, you know, like, I know that in his case, it would have been a choice between treating his condition and paying rent, you know? Right. So it's like, what choice is there really in that situation? And, you know, you see a lot of people self-medicate either with, like, you know, drugs and alcohol, or with medication that they get from a friend. And, you know, it's just no substitute for a world where everyone who needs to can just go to the doctor and get the medicine they need for free, you know?
Now, in your piece, you talk about how you were you had a friend who was sort of on the same side of politics and supported Obamacare and thought, you know, that's great, and maybe if you just make some tweaks and improvements to Obamacare, that'll be enough. For those who might be in that space or know people like that, because I'm assuming people who watch our show probably are supportive of Medicare for All, but, you know, if we want to communicate to people who think that Medicare for All is just too much of a shift, what is the right messaging? Because clearly you were moved, and you mentioned in this piece that your friend, who was where you were just a couple of years ago, is now supporting Joe Biden, and you've tried to talk with her about Medicare for All. What do you think is like the right messaging for people who think that Medicare for All is just too much too soon?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2020 is really centered around people telling their stories, which is part of the reason that I decided to talk about this, because I really think that people need to begin to understand the stakes. It's really easy to be blind or just assume, I don't know. I mean, you're fed the narrative that, like, things are going to be okay, or that a public option would be okay, you know, by the corporate media all the time. So if you're not really consuming other media, easy to, I think, miss, like how many people even who do have insurance are going bankrupt or being denied the care they need. And, I think that just more information can be really useful, sort of be like reading up on Medicare for All and like, talking things through with people about, why we do need to completely remove the profit motive. I have a lot of leftist friends, and, I think one thing I see on the internet sometimes is that, people will assume that every, let's say, like Elizabeth Warren supporter just completely, does not care about people being able to get medical care. And I actually don't think that's true, because I think it's really easy to think that insurance companies, like, as long as there's a way for everyone to get some insurance of some kind, that it would be all right. But, it's like, we understand that the profit motive is just, their incentive is to deny people care, and it needs to be completely removed.
I'm sure that, you mentioned the way that the news media represents this. That was probably revealing to you in the beginning when you went full Bernie bro, was how much of the messaging and the narrative is being pushed by these industries. It's one thing that, Medicare for All is being fought legislatively by industries like, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry wanting to keep those profit margins up, or of course the health insurance industry, which is one of the largest industries in this country. The healthcare industry is the largest job provider in the country. And the health insurance industry is using that as a tool, a weapon, legislatively to block Medicare for All. But with that being said, there's this whole messaging aspect of it. I mean, on the debate stage, how many debates were centered around attacking Bernie Sanders on Medicare for All? Were you really surprised by how much of an effort and how much money was being put out there to weaponize, to use like the cost as a weapon?
Yeah, I think, what I think was the most effective weapon? I'm trying to think through like what my particular closed-mindedness was to like Medicare for All necessarily being the solution. And I think that these kinds of debate questions played right into the fear, because when I was growing up, my brother had a terminal medical condition that he eventually died from when he was 23 years old. And our actual experience with insurance companies was a nightmare. Yeah. But I think I imagined my parents in that situation, like being denied medical care by some massive government bureaucracy, and like, oh no, if maybe, what would have happened to our family would have been like way worse in some cases. And I think all the fear mongering about like, we can't take people's insurance away is really effective. And I think that we need to help people understand that, a democratically accountable solution is actually going to be way better than companies that are motivated by profit. But I think all the taking your insurance away, fear mongering is, it's really effective for people. And I think that is like one of the biggest myths that we need to dispel.
Absolutely. I mean, I have family members who believe in Medicare for All, but they're just too afraid that it's going to be a shock to the system. And, they're not, it's the same thing. It's like, I'm not going to be able to go to my doctor. I'm not going to, right. Like the system that we have right now is so great, waiting for doctor's appointments, whether or not you can even get access to those doctor's appointments through referrals, taking longer. I mean, it's a logistical nightmare, but people are afraid of what they don't know. And then they hear these situations, you see Fox News talk about Venezuela, like anybody really knows what Venezuela's like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I should have been an ideal Medicare for All supporter from the moment it was introduced, because it's like my family went bankrupt, when I was a teen from medical bills, and when my brother was really, really sick, it's like my parents spent all their time struggling with insurance companies on the phone and worried that they were going to lose their home. And still, even with all that, like there was a fear in me of like, oh no, like, well, what if it was even worse than this? And I think a lot of it is about helping people see the possibility that it will actually be much, much better.
Right. I mean, even just for screenings, I mean, you mentioned that in your piece that how many tumors go unrecognized because people can't afford, or they're waiting too long, or even through the Obamacare system, it's harder to get access to the right specialists. Our system is broken, and the Republicans they made the best case against Obamacare for the left by fighting Obamacare for so long. I mean, they said that it was more expensive for small businesses. True. So support Medicare for all. If you're a small business owner and your costs are going up for healthcare, then you should be the #1 supporter of Medicare for all at this point.
I completely 100% agree. I mean, really, anytime a person has to decide if they have the money to go to the doctor, I think that's a morally unconscionable situation. I also think that people who have insurance through their job sometimes underestimate how bad it is for folks who don't. I don't have insurance through my job. I freelance a lot. And even after all of this, even after being somebody who talks about Medicare for all and health insurance, with a lot of my time, I don't have insurance because I make above the threshold for any kind of subsidy. And I also don't have enough to pay the insurance premium. And that sounds like an incredibly reckless decision to a lot of people, but it's I don't know. I mean, a lot of people don't have $12,000 a year to spend on health insurance that they're not going to use and is really bad. So, at this point, I just pay out of pocket every time I go to the doctor in cash, and it really sucks. And there's a ton of people in this situation, and there will continue to be with any other option except for Medicare for all.
Absolutely. Kate, now that you're a full-on Bernie bro, what has it been like, publishing this piece? What's the response been from all sides? I mean, I was catching some of it online, and I was blown away by how viral this article went. So clearly you touched on a nerve and spoke on behalf of so many people who relate to your story. But what's the feedback been like, since this is the middle of an election cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it's been intense. I would say that most people were really supportive. I got a ton of messages from other people who haven't been able to get the medical care they needed, especially people who were struggling with mental health issues that can't get medicine, or also people who have lost loved ones. And that was really, really heartbreaking. But it certainly redoubled my commitment to fighting for Medicare for all. And, there was a little bit of trolling. Definitely some folks got mad, especially some Elizabeth Warren supporters got mad, because I do think that Elizabeth Warren is saying that she supports Medicare for all. And I think for Bernie folks, we just need to kind of keep getting better at, messaging to people who do care about Medicare for all, why, we do need to push for it immediately, and why a public option to start with is not going to be sufficient, and why this is actually going to take a movement, but I do think that it's just confusing, right? Because a lot of every candidate on the debate stage is saying that they have the solution to our healthcare crisis. And, I think a lot of people really believe that their candidate does. And so, yeah.
You got to follow the money. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a candidate that takes insurance money or pharmaceutical industry money, you question their motives. If you're a candidate who is not willing to support Medicare for all in totality, why? What is holding you back? If you're a candidate that is receiving the support of the National Nurses Union, who have been the front and center advocates for Medicare for all, really bringing it to the table, that's a lot. I mean, Bernie Sanders has NNU, supports Medicare for all in its fullest and most the bill, and that is the most detailed bill that has all these co-signers. He's the one who co-wrote it with the Nurses Union. I mean, why are we even having this conversation? If you believe in Medicare for all, support Medicare for all. Watered down Medicare for all is not a Medicare for all.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Kate, extraordinary piece. I'm so grateful that we are fighting alongside you. Your story is extremely powerful. And you're right. The thing about Bernie's campaign is that he is welcoming everyday Americans to share their stories of why they're moved to support Bernie and his platform. And I'm just so grateful that you're out there sharing your message.
Oh, thank you so much, Nomiki. I really appreciate it, and we're gonna win.
I
think. Yeah.
And I hope to have you in studio soon, since I can probably see you from here, from the windows, since we're in the neighborhood.
All right, I'll see you later. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Kate.
Okay, bye.
Thank you to Larry Cohen and to Kate Willett for joining the show today. Thank you to Dorsey for powering through Mercury in retrograde. My God, he has a tough job, and he really got us through the show. Thank you to you guys for always joining us. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and join our Patreon at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. See you next week.